Have you ever said something so cruel that it haunted you for the rest of your life? Have you ever looked back at a moment and wished with every fiber of your being that you could take it back? Well, I have. And what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about life, about people, and about myself. This is my story, raw and unfiltered, about the day I made fun of a ragged boy and learned the hardest lesson of my entire existence.
I was 16 years old when this happened, and I can still remember every single detail as if it were yesterday. The smell of the autumn air, the sound of laughter echoing through the school hallways, the feeling of superiority that coursed through my veins like poison I didn't even know was killing me from the inside. I thought I was on top of the world. I thought I knew everything. I thought people like me were somehow better, somehow more deserving of happiness and respect. But I was so devastatingly wrong, and the universe was about to teach me a lesson I would never ever forget. My name is irrelevant to this story, but what matters is who I was back then versus who I am now. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't come easy, but it started with one boy, one moment, and one choice that I wish I had never made. If you've ever judged someone based on their appearance, if you've ever looked down on someone because they had less than you, if you've ever said something hurtful without thinking about the consequences, then this story is for you. Stay with me, because what happened next will shake you to your core just like it shook mine. I grew up in a neighborhood where success was measured by the size of your house, the brand of your car, and the price tag on your clothes. My father was a successful businessman, always traveling, always closing deals, always bringing home more money than we could ever spend. My mother was a socialite who spent her days at country clubs and charity galas, more concerned with appearances than with substance. I had everything a teenager could want: the latest smartphone, designer clothes, a car waiting for me on my 16th birthday, and a college fund that would guarantee my acceptance into any university I chose. But here's the thing about growing up with everything. You start to believe that you deserve it, that somehow you're special, that the world owes you something just because of where you were born and who your parents are. I never had to work for anything. I never had to struggle. I never had to wonder where my next meal would come from or whether I'd have a warm bed to sleep in at night. And because of that, I developed this twisted sense of superiority, this belief that people who had less were somehow less. I looked at homeless people on the street and thought they were lazy. I looked at kids at school who wore the same clothes every week and assumed their parents didn't care about them. I looked at anyone who wasn't living the life I was living and felt this disgusting mixture of pity and contempt. My friends were just like me, entitled, privileged, completely disconnected from reality. We formed this little bubble where nothing outside our perfect world mattered. We'd sit at lunch and make jokes about other students, tearing them down to build ourselves up, never once considering the impact of our words. We thought we were invincible. We thought we were untouchable. We thought our actions had no consequences because we had never faced any real consequences in our entire lives. Looking back now, I see how toxic that environment was, how it poisoned my mind and my heart, how it turned me into someone I barely recognize today. But back then, I was blind. I was willfully ignorant. I chose not to see the privilege I had because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as special as I thought I was. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I first saw him. The leaves were changing colors, painting the world in shades of orange and gold, and there was this crisp chill in the air that made everything feel alive. I was walking into school with my usual group of friends, laughing about something stupid that happened at a party over the weekend, when I noticed him standing by the entrance. He was new. That much was obvious because I had never seen him before and our school wasn't that big. But what caught my attention wasn't just that he was new. It was how he looked. His clothes were ragged, literally falling apart at the seams. His jeans had holes in them, but not the fashionable kind that cost $200 at the mall. These were real holes, worn through from use, from poverty, from necessity. His shirt was too small, the sleeves riding up his arms, and it had stains on it that looked like they'd been there for months. His shoes were held together with duct tape, and his backpack was so old and beaten up that I could see the fabric tearing away from the zipper. But it was his eyes that I remember most. They were dark and deep, filled with something I couldn't quite identify at the time. Maybe it was sadness, maybe it was resignation, maybe it was just exhaustion from carrying burdens that someone his age should never have to carry. He stood there alone, clutching his backpack straps like they were the only thing keeping him grounded, looking around at the campus with this expression that broke my heart when I think about it now, but at the time just made me feel uncomfortable. My friends noticed him too, and I could feel the shift in the energy around us. The jokes started immediately. Someone whispered about how he probably couldn't afford a shower. Someone else made a comment about checking our wallets. The laughter was cruel and sharp, cutting through the morning air like a knife, and I joined in because that's what I always did. I never stopped to think about how it felt to be on the receiving end of that laughter. I never considered what it must be like to walk into a new school, already struggling with poverty and hardship, only to be met with mockery and disgust. I just laughed along, participating in the casual cruelty that had become second nature to me. The moment that would change my life forever happened 3 days later. I had almost forgotten about the ragged boy, pushed him to the back of my mind like I did with anything that made me uncomfortable. But fate had other plans. I was in the cafeteria, sitting at my usual table with my usual friends, eating my usual overpriced lunch that my parents' money bought without a second thought. The cafeteria was loud, filled with the chatter of hundreds of students, the clanging of trays, the buzz of adolescent energy, and then I saw him again. He was standing in the lunch line, and when he got to the register, I saw him pull out a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket. The lunch lady said something to him, and I watched as his face fell. He was short on money. He couldn't afford the full meal. He started to put back items one by one, the drink first, then the side dish, then the dessert, until he was left with just a small sandwich and an apple. My friends noticed too, and that's when it started. One of them made a loud comment about how some people should just bring lunch from home if they can't afford to eat. Another one laughed and said maybe he should get a job instead of expecting handouts. And then I opened my mouth, and the words that came out would haunt me for the rest of my life. I said loud enough for several tables to hear, maybe if you dressed like a human being instead of a homeless person, you'd have money left over for food. The words hung in the air like poison. I watched as his shoulders tensed, as his hands gripped the tray tighter, as every eye in the cafeteria turned to look at him. The laughter from my table exploded, echoing off the walls, and other students joined in, creating this wave of cruelty that washed over him like a tsunami. I expected him to run away, to hide, to cry maybe. That's what usually happened when we targeted someone, but he didn't. Instead, he turned around slowly and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Not anger, not hatred, but something far worse. I saw disappointment. I saw pity. I saw someone looking at me like I was the one who needed help, like I was the one who was broken inside. And then he spoke. His voice was quiet but steady, cutting through the laughter like a bell cutting through fog. He said, "I hope you never have to understand what it's like to choose between eating and keeping the lights on. I hope you never have to wear the same clothes for weeks because they're the only ones you have. I hope you never have to feel the shame of being poor in a room full of people who see you as less than human. But most of all, I hope you learn compassion before life forces you to learn it the hard way." The cafeteria fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My friends stopped laughing. The smirk on my face froze and then slowly melted away. I wanted to say something back, to defend myself, to make a joke that would break the tension and return things to normal. But no words came out. I just sat there, feeling exposed, feeling seen in a way I had never been seen before. He held my gaze for another moment, and then he turned and walked away, leaving his tray on the counter, leaving the cafeteria, leaving me sitting there with the weight of my own cruelty pressing down on my chest like a boulder. The rest of the lunch period was awkward. My friends tried to brush it off, tried to make jokes to ease the tension, but something had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just done something terrible, something that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine shame, not the embarrassment of getting caught doing something wrong, but real, deep, soul-crushing shame that made me want to disappear. I pushed my food away, suddenly unable to eat, and spent the rest of the day in a fog, replaying his words over and over in my mind, wondering why they affected me so much, wondering why I couldn't just forget about it and move on like I always did. That evening, I couldn't focus on my homework. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept seeing his face, hearing his voice, feeling that look he gave me burning into my soul. I did something I rarely did. I asked my parents about him at dinner. I described what had happened, leaving out the parts that would make me look bad, and asked if they knew anything about a new student at school who seemed to be struggling financially. My father barely looked up from his phone, muttering something about how not everyone is cut out for success and that some people just need to work harder. My mother, however, paused. She set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She asked me to describe the boy again, and when I did, her face went pale. She exchanged a look with my father, and suddenly the atmosphere at the dinner table changed. She told me that she knew who he was. She had seen his name on some paperwork that came through her charity organization. His name was Daniel, and his story was not what I expected. Daniel's father had died in a car accident 2 years ago. His mother had been working 3 jobs to support Daniel and his 2 younger siblings, but 6 months ago, she had been diagnosed with cancer. The medical bills had wiped out what little savings they had. They had lost their house and were currently living in a shelter. Daniel's clothes were donations from the church, and he was attending our school because it was the only one within walking distance of the shelter. The $5 he had tried to spend on lunch was probably all the money he had to his name. He was at our school not because he wanted to be there, not because he was trying to get a better education, but because he had no other choice. And while I was sitting in my comfortable home with my expensive clothes and my guaranteed future, he was fighting just to survive each day. The information hit me like a freight train. I felt sick to my stomach. I excused myself from the table and went to my room, where I sat on my bed and cried for the first time in years. Real tears, not the manipulative ones I had used to get what I wanted from my parents, but genuine tears of regret and shame and horror at what I had become. I had mocked a boy who was living through a nightmare. I had laughed at someone who was showing more strength and courage in a single day than I had shown in my entire privileged life. I had used my words as weapons against someone who was already wounded, already struggling, already barely holding on. And for what? For a few laughs from my friends? To feel superior? To maintain my position in the social hierarchy of a high school that wouldn't matter in 5 years? I looked around my room at all the stuff I had. The gaming console, the laptop, the designer clothes hanging in my closet, the shelves full of books I had never read, the expensive artwork on the walls, and I felt disgusted. Disgusted with myself, disgusted with my life, disgusted with the person I had allowed myself to become. I had everything and I had learned nothing. I had every opportunity and I had wasted them all on shallow pursuits and meaningless status symbols. I had the privilege of education, of security, of a future, and instead of being grateful, instead of using those advantages to help others, I had used them to hurt someone who had nothing. That night, I made a decision. I decided that I needed to find Daniel and apologize. Not a half-hearted sorry that people give when they're caught doing something wrong, but a real genuine apology that came from a place of true understanding and remorse. But more than that, I decided that I needed to change. I needed to become a better person. I needed to learn the lessons that my privilege had prevented me from learning. I needed to understand what it meant to struggle, to suffer, to survive in a world that wasn't designed for your success. The next day at school, I looked for Daniel everywhere, but he wasn't there. He wasn't there the day after that either, or the day after that. A week went by and there was no sign of him. I asked around, trying to be discreet because I didn't want my friends to know what I was doing, but nobody seemed to know where he was. Finally, I swallowed my pride and went to the guidance counselor's office. I told her I was concerned about Daniel, that I hadn't seen him in school and I wanted to make sure he was okay. She looked at me with surprise, probably because I had never shown concern for anyone but myself before, and then her expression softened. She told me that Daniel had withdrawn from school. His mother's condition had worsened, and he needed to spend more time taking care of his siblings and being with her during her treatment. He was trying to finish his education through online courses, but it was difficult given everything he was dealing with. The counselor gave me an address, though she wasn't supposed to. She said she could see that I genuinely wanted to help, and that sometimes people surprise us with their capacity for change. I took the address and thanked her, and that afternoon, instead of going home to my comfortable house, I drove to the address she had given me. It was a shelter on the other side of town, in a neighborhood I had never been to before. The building was old and gray with peeling paint and bars on the windows. There were people sitting outside on the steps, some smoking, some just staring into space with empty eyes. I felt out of place in my expensive car, in my designer clothes, in my bubble of privilege that suddenly felt suffocating. I sat in the car for 10 minutes trying to gather the courage to go inside, wondering what I would even say, wondering if he would even want to see me. But I had come this far, and I couldn't turn back now. I got out of the car and walked to the entrance, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Inside, the shelter was clean but sparse. There were rows of beds separated by thin curtains, a communal eating area, and a small space with a few worn couches and a television. I asked the woman at the front desk if I could speak with Daniel, and she looked me up and down with suspicion before calling for him. When he appeared from behind one of the curtains, he looked tired, more tired than any 16-year-old should ever look. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were the same ragged ones I had mocked him for wearing. When he saw me, his expression didn't change. He didn't look angry or surprised or happy. He just looked at me with that same steady gaze that had haunted me for the past week. I asked if we could talk, and after a moment's hesitation, he nodded and led me outside to a small courtyard behind the building. We sat on a bench that was covered in graffiti, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. The silence was heavy with everything that had happened, with the cruelty of my words, with the weight of his circumstances. Finally, I spoke. I told him I was sorry. I told him that I had been wrong, that I had been cruel, that I had no excuse for what I said. I told him about how I had grown up with everything and understood nothing, how I had been so wrapped up in my own privilege that I couldn't see the humanity in people who were different from me. I told him that meeting him had opened my eyes to how terrible I had been, not just to him, but to everyone I had ever looked down on. I told him that I wanted to change, that I wanted to be better, that I wanted to help if he would let me. And then I cried. Right there on that graffiti-covered bench behind a homeless shelter, I cried like I had never cried before. All the shame, all the guilt, all the realization of how much damage I had done with my thoughtless cruelty came pouring out of me in tears that I couldn't control. Daniel sat there quietly while I cried, and when I finally stopped, he said something that I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "You know what the hardest part about being poor is? It's not the hunger or the cold or the constant worry about where you'll sleep tonight. It's the invisibility. It's the way people look right through you like you don't exist, like you're not worth their time or attention or basic human decency. And when they do see you, it's usually with disgust or pity or fear. You're not a person to them. You're a problem, a statistic, a cautionary tale. What you did in that cafeteria wasn't unusual. It happens to me every day in different ways. But what is unusual is that you're here now. Most people would have moved on, forgotten about me, convinced themselves that I deserved it or that it didn't matter. The fact that you're sitting here crying, apologizing, trying to understand, that tells me something. It tells me that maybe there's hope for you. Maybe there's hope for all of us." He told me that he didn't need my money or my pity. What he needed was for people like me to open their eyes, to see people like him as human beings with dreams and fears and dignity. He needed people to understand that poverty isn't a moral failing, that struggling doesn't make you less valuable, that everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of what they're wearing or where they're living. He told me about his mother, about how she was the strongest person he had ever known, about how she worked herself to exhaustion trying to provide for her children, about how she cried at night when she thought they couldn't hear her because she felt like she was failing them. He told me about his younger siblings, about how he had to be a parent to them now, about how he helped them with their homework and made sure they ate and tried to give them some sense of normalcy in a life that was anything but normal. He told me about his father, about the memories that kept him going on the hardest days, about the lessons his dad had taught him about kindness and integrity, and never giving up no matter how difficult things got. As I listened to Daniel speak, I realized something profound. Here was someone who had every reason to be angry, to be bitter, to hate the world and everyone in it. He had lost his father, watched his mother suffer, lived in poverty, endured mockery and humiliation, and yet there was no hatred in his voice. There was pain, yes, and exhaustion, and sadness that ran deeper than any ocean, but there was also this incredible strength, this unwavering dignity, this capacity for forgiveness that I had never witnessed before. He was teaching me what it meant to be truly human, what it meant to face unimaginable hardship and still choose kindness, what it meant to suffer and still see the good in people who had hurt you. I asked him what I could do, how I could help, how I could make things better. He thought for a moment and then said something that changed the entire trajectory of my life. He said, Don't try to save me. I don't need saving. What I need is for you to take what you've learned from this experience and use it to change how you see the world. The next time you see someone struggling, don't look away. Don't judge them. Don't assume you know their story. Just see them. Acknowledge their humanity. Treat them with the respect that every person deserves. And if you can help without taking away their dignity, then help. But the most important thing you can do is to never forget this feeling you have right now. Never forget what it feels like to realize you've hurt someone. Never forget what it's like to sit on the other side of privilege and see how much damage unconscious cruelty can do. Take that feeling and let it guide you for the rest of your life. We sat there for a while longer, talking about life and struggle and hope and change. He told me about his dreams of becoming a doctor someday, about how he wanted to help people who couldn't afford medical care, about how his mother's illness had shown him how broken the healthcare system was for people without money. I told him about my own empty dreams of business school and making more money, and how hollow those goals seemed now in comparison to his purpose-driven vision. When I finally left the shelter that day, I was a different person. The drive home felt surreal, like I was seeing my neighborhood for the first time. The big houses, the manicured lawns, the expensive cars in every driveway, it all looked different now. Not worse necessarily, but just different. I understood now that I had been given advantages that had nothing to do with my own merit or worth. I had been born into privilege, and that privilege had blinded me to the reality that most people face every single day. I went home and looked at my life with new eyes. I started volunteering at a homeless shelter every weekend. I began tutoring kids from low-income neighborhoods. I used my allowance to donate to organizations that helped families like Daniel's. But more importantly, I changed how I treated people. I stopped participating in the cruel jokes at school. I started standing up for people who were being mocked or bullied. I began to see every person I encountered as someone with their own story, their own struggles, their own dignity that deserved to be respected. My friends didn't understand at first. They thought I was going through a phase, that I would eventually come back to my old self. But I never did. Some of those friendships faded away, and I was okay with that. I realized that I had been surrounding myself with people who reflected the worst parts of me, and I needed to find people who would challenge me to be better. I kept in touch with Daniel over the months that followed. I visited him at the shelter regularly, and we developed a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. I met his mother before she passed away 6 months later, and she was exactly as he had described: strong, loving, dignified despite her circumstances. Her death hit Daniel hard, but he kept going because that's what she would have wanted. He kept taking care of his siblings. He kept studying. He kept dreaming of a better future. I helped where I could, not by throwing money at the problem, but by being present, by being a friend, by helping him navigate systems that were designed to keep people like him down. I helped him apply for scholarships. I drove him to interviews. I babysitted his siblings when he needed to study. I learned more from him in those months than I had learned in 16 years of expensive private education. He taught me about resilience, about dignity in the face of suffering, about the strength it takes to be kind when the world has been cruel to you. He taught me that poverty doesn't define a person, that circumstances don't determine character, that some of the richest people in the world are poor in the ways that actually matter. Years have passed since that day in the cafeteria. Daniel did become a doctor, just like he dreamed. He got a full scholarship to college, worked multiple jobs to support his siblings while studying, and graduated at the top of his class. Today, he runs a free clinic in an underserved community, providing healthcare to people who can't afford it. He's exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. Someone who took his pain and turned it into purpose, who took his suffering and used it to reduce the suffering of others. As for me, I went to college and studied social work instead of business. I work with at-risk youth now, trying to help kids who are growing up in the kind of poverty that I once mocked and didn't understand. Every day, I try to honor the lesson that Daniel taught me. Every day, I try to see people, really see them, instead of looking past them or through them. Every day, I try to remember what it felt like to sit on that bench behind the shelter and realize how much damage unconscious cruelty can do. I think about that moment in the cafeteria often. I think about the boy I was and the man I became because of one person's grace and wisdom. I think about how differently my life could have turned out if Daniel had responded to my cruelty with more cruelty, if he had met my mockery with anger instead of with dignity and truth. He could have destroyed me with his words that day, He could have made me feel small and worthless the way I had tried to make him feel, but he didn't. Instead, he gave me a gift, the gift of awareness, the gift of perspective, the gift of a chance to become better. The hardest lesson I ever learned wasn't taught in a classroom or found in a book. It was taught by a ragged boy in a school cafeteria who had every reason to hate me, but chose compassion instead. It was learned through shame and guilt and the painful process of confronting my own privilege and cruelty. It was earned through months of uncomfortable self-reflection and the difficult work of changing not just my behavior, but my entire worldview. And here's what I want you to understand. We all have the capacity for both cruelty and kindness. We all make choices every single day about how we treat other people, about how we use our words, about how we wield whatever power or privilege we have. Those choices matter. They matter more than we realize in the moment. They have consequences that ripple out far beyond what we can see. When you mock someone for their appearance, you're not just making a joke. You're telling them that they're less than human, that their suffering is entertainment, that their dignity doesn't matter. When you look down on someone for being poor or struggling or different, you're not just having an opinion. You're participating in a system that dehumanizes people, that makes it easier to ignore suffering, that perpetuates inequality and injustice. But when you choose to see people, when you choose to treat everyone with dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances, when you choose kindness even when cruelty would be easier, you're doing something revolutionary. You're recognizing the fundamental humanity in every person you meet. You're breaking down the barriers that divide us. You're making the world a little bit better, one interaction at a time. I'm sharing this story not because I want praise or forgiveness. I'm sharing it because I believe that we all need to hear stories like this. We need to be reminded of our capacity for both harm and healing. We need to understand that the way we treat people matters, that our words have power, that privilege comes with responsibility. Have you ever judged someone based on their appearance? Have you ever made fun of someone who was struggling? Have you ever looked at another person and decided they were less worthy of respect or kindness because of their circumstances? If you have, then you're not alone. Most of us have done these things at some point. The question is not whether we've made these mistakes, but what we do after we realize we've made them. I want you to think about the people in your life who are struggling. The classmate who wears the same clothes every week, the coworker who brings the same simple lunch every day, the neighbor who can't afford to fix up their house, the person on the street corner asking for help. These are not statistics or problems or cautionary tales. These are human beings with stories and dreams and dignity that exists regardless of their bank account balance. They deserve your respect. They deserve your kindness. They deserve to be seen and acknowledged and treated like they matter, because they do matter. Every single one of them matters just as much as you do, just as much as I do, just as much as anyone else in this world. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this. You have the power to change someone's day, someone's perspective, maybe even someone's life, simply by how you choose to treat them. You can be the person who adds to someone's pain, or you can be the person who reminds them of their worth. You can be the cruel voice in a cafeteria full of laughter, or you can be the quiet voice of kindness in a world that desperately needs more of it. The choice is yours, and it's a choice you make not just once, but every single day, with every single interaction, with every single person you meet. So I'm asking you now, what choice will you make? Will you see people, really see them, or will you look past them? Will you judge them by their circumstances, or will you recognize the strength it takes just to survive? Will you use your words to tear people down, or will you use them to build people up? The answer to these questions will determine not just what kind of person you are, but what kind of world we create together. Before we end, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever been in a situation like this, either as the person doing the mocking or as the person being mocked? Have you ever realized, too late, that your words hurt someone more than you intended? Or have you been on the receiving end of cruelty that changed how you see the world? I want to hear your stories. I want to know your experiences. Share them in the comments below, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. It might be the thing that makes someone think twice before making fun of another person. It might be the thing that helps someone feel less alone in their struggle. Understanding the content we've discussed today isn't just about feeling good or having an emotional moment. It's about genuinely grasping how our actions affect other people, how our privilege blinds us to reality, and how we can do better. This isn't just a nice story with a happy ending. This is a call to action. This is a challenge to examine your own behavior, your own biases, your own treatment of people who are different from you. This is an invitation to change, to grow, to become the kind of person who makes the world better rather than worse. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think differently about how you treat people, if it reminded you of the importance of kindness and empathy and human dignity, then please leave a like on this video. That like tells me that this message resonated with you, that you understand the importance of what we've discussed here today. It helps spread this message to more people who need to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that challenge us to be better, stories that remind us of our shared humanity, stories that inspire real change in how we see and treat each other, then please subscribe to Through My Eyes. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a video, because I'm committed to sharing stories that matter, stories that make a difference, stories that have the power to change hearts and minds. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. Thank you for being willing to sit with the discomfort of examining these difficult topics. Thank you for being part of a community that values growth and change and becoming better versions of ourselves. Remember, the hardest lessons are often the most valuable ones, and the most important changes begin with a single decision to do better. Make that decision today. Choose kindness. Choose empathy. Choose to see people. Your choice matters more than you know.